What if the strongest army in the world could be destroyed not by swords, not by arrows, but by a river? Imagine a force so powerful that entire nations never dare to resist, suddenly swallowed in one moment of chaos. This is a story of how a tiny nation, desperate to survive, turned water into their greatest weapon and drowned an empire's dream of invincibility. You're about to uncover how geography itself became deadlier than any weapon. Over the next 15 minutes, you'll see how arrogance blinded an empire, how careful planning turned a river into a trap, and how a small people used patience and cunning to change history. By the end, you'll understand a lesson armies still ignore. Never underestimate local knowledge. For decades, this empire had crushed every enemy in its path. Their soldiers marched in perfect formation. Tens of thousands moved like a single unstoppable wall. Towns surrendered before a single spear was raised. Tributes poured into the capital, and the empire grew fat on victory. To the people who opposed them, fighting seemed hopeless. Even distant rulers paid taxes rather than face their army. But pride and power can blind a leader. The empire believed size and discipline could defeat anything. Scouts warned them about marshes and hidden currents. Local guides mentioned narrow crossings that could trap a line of soldiers. Political leaders ignored these reports, sure that brute force would cover any mistake. They thought no trap was clever enough to stop their iron ranks. But what happens when a battlefield is not land or sky, but water? Numbers mean little when nature fights back. The smaller nation had little chance in an open field. Their weapons were older. Their men were fewer. Supplies ran low. Women hid their children and watched the columns pass, knowing defeat could come next. Yet the land was theirs. Every river bend, every hidden shoal, every difficult crossing was known to them like a map on their palms. They turned that knowledge into a plan. Leaders met in the dark. By firelight, they traced river paths on skins of parchment and in the dirt. They watched how currents formed eddies behind rocks. They learned which banks held quicksand and which bridge stones would sink under weight. They tested small boats at night and noted how debris gathered under certain arches. They did not plan one trick. They planned a chain of traps. Fake retreats would draw the proud army forward. Bridges would be weakened in secret. Stakes and pits would wreck horses and make cavalry useless. If you were their general, would you gamble everything on a river or surrender and live under foreign rule? They worked at night. Men carried hidden tools, cut ropes, loosened bridge planks. Farmers were asked to break small supports so that when weight came, wood would snap. Craftsmen sharpened logs and bound them like weapons. Small teams hid on cliffs and behind trees with ropes and levers ready to release boulders and logs at a single signal. Scouts also spread rumors of ambushes in other areas to divert attention. It was not simple sabotage. It was theater designed to produce a single result: panic. When the empire advanced, they saw what looked like retreating fighters. Pride turned to greed. Chasing enemies makes generals eager. The imperial lines moved into narrow river crossings. The first bridges creaked. Horses slipped. Mud slowed the ranks. Hidden stakes gored the hooves and tore riders from saddles. Still they pushed. Then the signal. From above, logs slammed down. Rocks tumbled. Bridges gave way. Soldiers were thrown into cold water. In that water, heavy armor, shields, and sword became a terrible weight. Men who had shown courage on open plains found themselves gasping and helpless. Armor, the very symbol of their might, pulled them down like anchors. Picture the roar of 1,000 men silenced by water, not by steel. The battle's loudest sounds were not the clash of swords, but the splash of men and horses. Chaos spread faster than any well-timed charge. Ranks crumpled. Officers could not be heard. Horns blared but meant nothing when the ground broke beneath a man's feet. Soldiers fought not a foreign enemy, but the river itself. In the panic, friends pushed friends. Some hid behind shields only to be crushed by the crowd. We can think about the mechanics for a moment. Heavy armor traps air and water differently. When a man wearing layered metal falls into fast water, he loses balance and buoyancy. The armor fills and drags. Horses, burdened and panicked, flounder and drag men with them. Bridges are designed to hold a certain weight. Once supports are cut, the sudden collapse concentrates force in ways no one expects. when a formation becomes jammed at a crossing. A small shock can cause a chain reaction that breaks the whole line. Eyewitness accounts, recorded later by chroniclers and storytellers, describe screams, floating shields, and banners tangled in reeds. Survivors remembered the cold of the water, the sudden silence after the chaos, and the way the river kept flowing as if nothing had happened. What the underdogs had planned as a trap turned the river into a judge. It did not cheat. It simply did what it always did, flowed. This was not a tidy victory. It was messy, brutal, and complete. The Empire's pride did not die in battle. It drowned. The aftermath was quiet and heavy. Wounded men crawled from water, shivering and broken. Those who survived told stories of cliffs and logs, and of commanders who could only watch. The small nation gathered survivors and buried their dead. Songs were sung around fires about the night the river fought for them. Children would learn the river's name and the tune that told how it turned the tide. For the Empire, the loss was more than a military defeat. It was a blow to confidence. Their reputation slipped. Neighbors who had once bowed now tested their strength. Allies reconsidered treaties. The emperor had to answer for the loss, and internal rivalries grew louder. Where fear had kept obedience, new courage began to appear among those who had once bowed. To make this clearer, consider the empire's logistics. Large armies march on food, wood, and horses. A river trap does not simply cost lives. It breaks supply lines. Wagons overturn, food rots, and the morale of soldiers collapses when they see supplies swept away. Commanders depend on messengers and steady roads. When the ground itself becomes hostile, orders arrive too late, and information is wrong. Panic replaces planning. There is a human side, too. Survivors spoke of small acts of courage amid horror. A medic waded into cold water to pull a man to shore. A soldier gave his cloak to warm a friend. These moments do not change the scale of loss, but they shape memory. They shape the songs and stories that keep the event alive for generations. History keeps repeating this lesson. Think of Hannibal, whose careful use of terrain and surprise wrecked Roman formations. Think of river ambushes in later centuries, where locals used currents and hidden knowledge to outmaneuver larger forces. In modern times, guerrilla fighters use rivers, swamps, and forests to tire and trap better-armed enemies. The tools change, but the core idea stays the same. Knowledge beats arrogance. Experts who study warfare point to 3 tactical lessons. 1. Always respect the ground. Terrain is not neutral. Know your rivers, swamps, and passes. 2. Never assume an enemy will act like you. Pride leads to predictable moves. 3. Use deception, but support it with scouting and timing. The underdog's plan worked because it joined patience, local skill, and perfect timing. If you want to stop a larger force, make the battlefield do half the work for you. This story also warns modern planners. Technology changes, but human error does not. A drone cannot fix a flooded bridge if a supply train is stuck. Commanders must study local conditions and listen to those who know the land. Ignoring local knowledge is a mistake that keeps costing armies across centuries. The river did more than drown men. It humbled an empire. It showed the power of local knowledge and patience. It forced political change and left a story told by riversides for generations. If you enjoyed this look at how nature and strategy combine to defeat an empire, hit like and subscribe for more stories where the underdog wins through craft, not just courage. Tell us in the comments which tactic you want explained next, ambushes, scorched earth, or coastal traps, and we'll break it down. Thank you for listening. Remember, in history, the smallest detail often holds the greatest power.